would like to start now. My name is June Bam Hutchison, and I'm acting head for African Studies. And it's a great pleasure to warmly welcome you to the Center for African Studies Gallery and to the opening of the 2015 winner of the Ernest Cole Awards exhibition, the work of Masixole Feni. As I had a chat and asked him about his work. He still lives. He made the point. He still lives in the community, and he's very aware of this debate, and he wants the debate. And it's a form of storytelling, because these kinds of works ask us to reflect on the everyday violence and realities that are probably invisibilized and hidden. And so there's a debate: you visibilize it, you invisibilize it, the lens of the camera, the gaze, all those issues that will come with the debate. And then he makes an important point, and he says, I work with Social Justice Coalition, and this is part of activism. This is part of, I'm inspired in this collaboration and to advocate for inquiries into poverty and lack of service delivery. And on that note, I now give over and invite Professor Edgar Peterson to address you. Professor.
June, thank you very much for the introduction, and to the Centre for African Studies for the invitation to share some reflections in response to Masixole's fantastic body of work. It's an intimidating honor. One, because I'm not a scholar of photography, I'm a scholar of the city, and but I'm absolutely convinced that one of the main reasons why we struggle to understand what our cities might be and what they might become is because we've got a poverty of representation, we've got a poverty of narrative, we've got a poverty of understanding. The work on the walls here will tell you that it is without a doubt an exceptional contribution to the archive of documentary photography, not just in South Africa, not just in Cape Town, but in this global movement of trying to apprehend, trying to capture the elusive beauty of everyday life. It's a beauty that, of course, is always barbed with violence, with hate, with indignity. But it is, ultimately, if you look into these frames, whether it is the two girls that is peeking out from the TRA, transitional housing settlement, or it is the gait of how someone walks to work, there is a profound beauty to the capacity to get on with life, despite the conditions, the material deprivations that are documented for us here. It's almost a series of biblical plagues. Pollution at a scale and at a prevalence that is, frankly, for sort of our middle-class sensibilities, unconscionable, but absolutely the familial landscapes that has to be traversed to get to work, to get to the shebeen, to be able to shop, to get to the taxi rank, to find water, to find safety, and of course, to find a place to shit, right? And so the work, when you look across the pages of the book, has got a section that is about an archiving of what I would call a series of indignities that is hardwired into everyday life. Indignities around sanitation, indignities around the challenge of getting access to enough potable water, indignities around the dangers associated with navigating, hacking the electricity grid so that you can have some energy, so that your children can study. And of course, indignities related to the profound problem of homelessness as it manifests, particularly in District 6. The fourth plague that the book captures and conjures is the plague of eviction. Right? This arbitrary, not arbitrary, that's wrong, this determined show of force by a state that insists it has to enforce certain laws, but of course it absolves itself from realizing other rights. And the state does what it needs to do to get people off private land, to get people out of their homes. And there's one photograph of a bed around the corner there, broken bed, post an eviction, which in some ways is maybe the least choreographed of some of the images here, but in some ways really speaks to what this means when the place where you put your head on a pillow at night is in the middle of nowhere, cracked, and, if you will, portent of the impossibility of facing another day, another night. And similarly, the toilet in the middle of nowhere, suspended in time in this flood pool. It's just the cistern, not the cistern, the toilet bowl, disconnected. And I can't think of a more poignant, a more poetic, and a more brutal account of the profound failure of all of the Cape Townians that have to still continue to make a living without the fundamental dignity associated with decent sanitation. Because when it happens in our own backyard, when it happens around the corner, the best we can think of is one food parcel, maybe once on the way to work in our 4x4s, but no consideration of the possibility that surely in a city of this amount of wealth, this level of institutional capacity, resources, and so forth, that this really should not be happening all the time. And so I want to leave you with a passage from one of my favorite writers about the city, Jonathan Rabban, who wrote this book in 1974. I don't know if you were born yet, not yet. And he was struggling with how to make sense of cities, big cities, as a writer. But you also work in narrative, just in visual narrative. And so I want to close off by reading his reflection on the impossibility of ever truly capturing the city in its fullness. For the city and the book are opposed forms. To force the city's spread, contingency, and aimless motion into the tight progression of a narrative is to risk a total falsehood. There is no single point of view from which one can grasp the city as a whole. That, indeed, is the central distinction between the city and the small town. For each citizen, the city is a unique and private reality, and the novelist, planner, or sociologist, or photographer, whose aims have more in common than each is often willing to admit, finds himself dealing with an impossibly intricate tessellation of personal roots, spurs, and histories within the labyrinth of the city. A good working definition of metropolitan life would center on its intrinsic illegibility. Most people are hidden most of the time. Their appearances are brief and controlled, their movements secret, the outlines of their lives obscure. Writing a book or assembling a book of photographs, one pretends to an omniscience or in the command of logic which the experience of living in a city continuously contradicts. The truest city is the most private, and autobiography is the kind of writing which is least likely to muddy the city with the small untruths of seeming to know and deduce much more about its life than is really possible. And each of these images, for me, are those kinds of micro-autobiographies that gives us brief glimpse into this elusive reality. I want to truly thank you for the gift of this work, and I want to celebrate your talent and your courage. This is really, really important.